welcome to a brand new episode of Seize the Moment podcast. And today we have a very special guest. Today we have Eric Wilson. He's the Thomas H. Pritchard Professor of English at Wake Forest University. He's the author of books Against Happiness, In Praise of Melancholy, an LA Times bestseller, Everyone Loves a Good Train Wreck, Why We Can't Look Away, and Keep It Fake, Inventing an Authentic Life, as well as many other books exploring connections among literature, film, and psychology. And his newest book, available now, is called How to Be Weird, an off-kilter guide to living a one-of-a-kind life. Welcome, Eric, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I look forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. And so to quote a passage from Eric's book, Eric wrote, "So great creators have made the outre their revoir. The eccentric artist is a cliche, but not an inaccurate one. Truman Capote feared planes with 2 nuns on board and avoided rooms containing yellow roses. Estee Lauder touched the faces of random strangers. Monkeys, peacocks, a bear, a crane, and a crocodile were the pets of Lord Byron, who imbibed wine from skulls. Frida Kahlo also enjoyed a menage, including a fawn named Granizo and an eagle named Gertrudis Capablanca, or White Shit Gertrude. Charles Dickens stuffed the paw of his dead cat Bob and affixed it to an ivory letter opener. Poet Gerard de Nerval walked a lobster on a leash. Einstein gathered cigarette butts and smoked them in his pipe. Enamored of oxidization, Dolly peed on the brass bands of fountain pens. Shirley Jackson, author of The Lottery, practiced witchcraft. To finish The Hunchback of Notre Dame on time, Victor Hugo locked himself in his room naked. 19th century poet Frederick Schiller stored rotten apples in his desk and inhaled them as he wrote. French composer Eric Satie consumed only white food and collected umbrellas. Steve Jobs ate so many carrots his skin turned orange. Buckminster Fuller, architect of the geodesic dome, wore 3 watches, slept only 2 hours in the day, and updated his diary every 15 minutes. Maya Angelou wrote best in hotel rooms from 6:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. She required that the sheets never be cleaned and that sherry, playing cards, and the Bible always be on hand. Yayoi Kusama, artist of infinite mirrors, chooses to live in an asylum and paint her world in polka dots. Tita Swinton sleeps in glass boxes in the middle of museums, and Bjork crawls to rehearsals from her apartment. So this is incredibly strange stuff, as is, I'm sure, obvious to many of our audience members. So what's so interesting, I think, in kind of reading this book and just getting kind of a background about who you are and why weirdness and authenticity is just, in generally speaking, is so important to you. I started thinking about how we kind of have this sort of a dualistic conception of weirdness, because on the one hand, we kind of shy away from it, and most of us want to fit in, and obviously we want to kind of stand in the background, and we don't want to really stand out. But on the other hand, these people that we greatly admired, most of whom I just read about, they are really strange and they are super eccentric, right? So how do you think we kind of make sense of that on the one hand, we're sort of freaked out by it and we shy away from it, but yet, in the juxtaposition of it, we kind of admire it, and in some ways we want to be it too at the same time?
Yeah. So I mean, obviously those examples you read are extreme examples of very brilliant people doing quite outlandish things. And I guess in my book, I'm not really saying would all necessarily do that. I think the main thesis of my book is that the part of us that feels weirdest to ourselves, well, that's really our most individualistic self. Like, who you are is you at your weirdest, because it's the weird parts of us that don't conform to the mainstream, that don't conform to conventions. Those parts that maybe we're a little ashamed of sometimes, or maybe we're a little afraid of sometimes, or maybe make us feel awkward sometimes. But my feeling is those are the parts of us that separate us from everybody else. And what these artists were brave enough to do was simply express those parts of themselves as flamboyantly as they could. But I think all of us probably do feel like, well, what really makes me different from other people? In a world where we're all sort of bombarded by media with the social media, or watching prestige TV or movies, it's real difficult not to live a cliched kind of life, not to just kind of follow the models that we see around us all the time. So I hope that this book is kind of a call to individuality, as much as anything, because mainly that makes life more fun and more interesting. Because let's face it, life is predictable and monotonous most of the time, especially the older we get. So, anything we can do to just swerve a little bit from the norm can make life feel kind of more interesting and stimulating. Let me put it just another way. I think I define the weird in this book as defamiliarizing the familiar. What does that mean? Well, right when this book came out, I had a beard for the longest time, and for like 10 years, and I shaved my beard. And you know that look. I don't know if you've ever done that. And you like look in the mirror the next day after you shaved your beard. It's like, who is that? It's
Yeah.
like me, and it's not me. It's like it's familiar, but it's not. Or say you get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and you turn the light on. It's like, and look in the mirror. It's like, who's that guy? So
Yeah.
most of the 99 exercises in the book are ways just to kind of give us like a little bit of a nudge out of our normal tracks of life, out of the ruts of life. And again, it just in hopes that it makes us feel more alive, more stimulated.
No, totally. I love the book. I actually went
Thanks.
through like I would say 75% of the
Yeah.
exercises.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this one that really, really I resonated with, which is like, oh, come up with a different identity for yourself. Give yourself a different name, different sort of character traits. What's that person like? Right. And kind of embody or become that person, right? And then anytime you go through your sort of daily, the automaticity of things, right? You might think to that back to that character, or identify how would that character sort of take it, right? And I love it because I got really weird with it, really weird with it.
Good.
Yeah, like for example, let's say, okay, so in terms of like reactivity, right? Let's say somebody's, I mean, not that I get insulted or anything like that or whatever, but say somebody does a little roast joke and maybe where I would have normally found myself kind of reacting or something like that. I'm like, no, this other character instantly stoic, super stoic, will not react, will also be sort of a good sport, as far as that goes, kind of go with the joke and that sort of thing. And I even got weirder than that. Maybe I won't get into it, kind of in the realms of like kind of like magic and stuff like that. Like you kind of have an impact on your environment. But it's interesting. It made my brain go to so many different places. And without having read like an exercise like that in the book, I don't think I would have really done that. Or if I do, it would have been very rare, right? So it got me kind of out of my ego as far
That's
as
fantastic.
that goes.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you brought that exercise up. Mainly because I think that exercise might have been one of the first I came up with, mainly because it has a lot of bearing on my life. Sometimes people ask me, well, what's the origin of this book? And strangely enough, it comes from my struggle with depression and what one of my therapists told me to do a long time ago. My daughter at that time was 2 years old. She's now 21. And I was really kind of dipped into a deep depression. And I felt like I wasn't being a good father because I couldn't really connect to her. I was withdrawn. So I went to my therapist and he said, look, your problem is you're trying to be a good dad. You're trying to be a good dad, like in a conventional way, like be a responsible dad, a wise dad, an educational dad. He says, that's not your bag. He says, you're a pretty strange guy. You strike me as kind of funny. Why don't you create a character called Crazy Dad? And whenever you're around your daughter, your only goal is to make her laugh. That's all you have to do. And I did it. And it kind of worked. So this idea that when we're not feeling great about ourselves, we have the imagination to imagine sort of other characters, other masks, other personae, and kind of live into them a little bit. It can be fun and it kind of liberate us from when we feel insulted or pain. But also it can be a really powerful way of thinking yourself out of a dark period of your life.
That's so fascinating because a part of ego or part of just kind of identify, like for example, oh, I'm supposed to be this kind of dad, right? Like, or I'm supposed to adhere to this sort of a norm or label, right? And act in these sorts of ways. When you deviate from that, it's like it disrupts those notions, right? And could even lead to kind of disrupting even that sort of depressive self, right? Because like part of what might keep you in depression is maybe, I mean, there's different strokes for different folks as far as this goes, but it could be identifying with certain thoughts that you might have in your head and then thinking, oh, that's me, like, oh, I'm depressed right now, therefore that's my label. But all of a sudden you start doing these things that kind of disrupt your pattern, right? And then by shocking yourself sort of out of that pattern, that could lead to novel things sort of sprouting from there and take you out of that depression.
Oh, and also because I want to add to that, because Eric focuses on this a lot in terms of his other work, more so than on this book, or in this book. So we talk about interpretations, right, and interpretations that we have of ourselves. So I think what you're saying is that we get kind of stuck in our interpretations, and we think we are this certain thing. So interestingly, Eric has a lot of great work on authenticity, and that it's actually pretty complicated, right? And sometimes we actually get stuck in this kind of narrow way of seeing ourselves, and it closes off possibilities to, things for us, potential things that we can do, potential relationships we could have, potential points of success or achievement or whatever, because we're stuck in thinking that I am this person.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but I was taught as a young person that I have a true self. And my goal in life as I become educated and experience is find my true self. Well, I think that's really a frustrating and sometimes destructive belief, because there is this idea that I'm the person who can do these things. And when we are feeling bad, we feel like, well, I'm the kind of person that will live out these events. That's just who I am. We're locked into a character written for us. But from what I've gathered, and mainly through, I'll put it this way. Cognitive behaviors therapy has really been useful for me, as opposed to, say, depth psychology. I went through a lot of like Jungian psychology, even Freudian psychology. This kind of inward gazing didn't help me. The cognitive behaviors therapist says, look, we can change habits. If these things are making you unhappy, change these 2 or 3 habits, and you'll probably feel better. In other words, it's very externally driven. And that speaks to me. It's like we're all novelists, and our self is the creation that we are writing. But we're constantly, hopefully, revising that self as life changes, as new challenges come our way. For some people, this might be a little scary, because like, no, I'm this person and I'm consistent with this person. I'm like, great. If that feels good to you, do it. I like the idea that myself is a kind of gathering of potentialities, and I can choose which potentialities I want to actualize. There's a real freedom to that. And I think this book, and also Keep It Fake, is both very much about that we are living in potentia. We're living potentials, and we're constantly deciding which potentials to actualize. And this book invites us to actualize those potentials, and I hope stimulating and vitalizing ways.
Yeah,
no, for sure. There's even that one exercise.
Wait, is it okay before we just move on? Because I really just want to harp on something.
It's totally related.
Yeah, 100%. Okay. So yeah, because Eric, I know you mentioned obviously being in therapy, and I wanted to talk about the diagnosis that you were given, because this was something, right? I listened to other podcasts that you were doing, and this was super fascinating to me. So especially in the way that you kind of thought of yourself as a father. So I remember listening to a segment where you essentially said something along the lines of, when you were diagnosed with bipolar disorder, the thinking was, well, am I able to be a good father, right? What does this diagnosis actually say about my ability? So yeah, can we talk a little bit about that? And because this is why it's so important to me, because when you think of a true self, a lot of times what happens with people is they look at a diagnosis and they say, well, this is who I am, especially when we're getting into personality disorder territory. So somebody might say something, well, like, because I have, let's say, obsessive compulsive personality disorder or borderline personality disorder, like, this is sort of my true essence. And whenever I'm going against that, or like you said, in behaviorist terms, we're acting as if that's a false self, right? That's sort of a character that I'm playing. So how do we kind of start thinking about this? Because in the terms of who we want to be and how we want to be in our relationships, we often do want to be a good father, right? We often do want to be a good parent, a good friend, a good lover, whatever it is, right? And then we have these diagnostic labels that are prescribed or subscribed, or, whatever term you want to use, they're sort of given to us. And then we're thinking, oh my God, I can never live up to that. So can you share about, your experience and what was that like for you?
I'd be happy to. So yeah, when my daughter was about 1-2 years old, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And again, I'm just going to focus on my experience. I'm not going to try to make any kind of claims about how other people should conduct their lives if they're suffering from mental illness. But I feel like when I felt really, really depressed, it was a feeling of like indifference and apathy. It's like I just couldn't really care. I felt numb. I couldn't really care about anything. Either that or the mania would kick in, and I would be so sort of revved up that I couldn't think straight or really relate to other people in a healthy way. And I'll be honest, at that point, I would say things like, I am bipolar. And therefore, I say to my wife, my then wife, you can't expect me to be a good husband and a good father. It's like if I had colon cancer or or like an amputated leg. You wouldn't expect me to run a marathon, would you? So there was a way in which I was using my mental illness as a way not to take responsibility, as a way to just saying, you don't expect me. It's not fair of you to expect me to do these things. Well, through therapy and through good medication, I moved from I am depressed to I have depression. And that little shift is what you were talking about. I went from feeling like I was one with that mental illness to that mental illness is one of many ways that I express myself. And I started, sort of gaining enough distance from it to try to make decisions about, changing the narrative. It's like biochemically, I'm bipolar disorder. In the same way that if I get pushed off a cliff, I'm going to fall down to the ground. Gravity's going to push me down, but I can choose how to fall. Like if I'm falling into the ocean, I can do a gainer or a swan dive or a flip or a belly flop. So in other words, there are biological givens, but I do think if we see the self as something to play with instead of something to live up to, then we can think of life in those ways. We're all falling, but we can decide how to fall.
Right. And was that the framework or the reshifting of your framework of yourself? Was that a way for you to sort of kind of mesh or live in harmony with the bipolar disorder, to say, okay, well, I can't live up to the standard of being a good father, whatever, your kind of objective understanding of that was, but I can be this type of father, and that is a good enough father.
Yeah. So thanks for asking that. So I can refine this a little bit. I think the goal in life for all of us is to connect with people, connect with people that we want to love us and that we want to love. And for me to shift from being a traditional good father to being like crazy dad, I wasn't teaching my daughter lessons, but we laughed all the time, which is better in some ways. So yeah, I chose this role, and it did what I wanted it to do. It may not have made me good with a big G, but it made me a father who could connect with his daughter. So that's really my goal. I guess it's all of our goals. But I believe that we can create narratives sometimes. We need to change the narrative sometimes. If we're not connecting with people, well, let's think about what we can do to connect better with people. Maybe we can change our narrative, change our story.
Yeah. Yeah, no, being married to, a particular label or how you see yourself, it's incredibly damaging, right? In terms of relationships and connecting with others. But in my own experience too, like I thought, okay, maybe right now there was a time in my life where I kept very to myself. I was thinking, okay, if I don't interact with other people, like if I kind of stay like a hermit at home, let's say, I can't upset them. I can't say something that's going to make them have a bad reaction. Or I even kind of did this too. For example, maybe I would hang out with my friends every so often, maybe once a month, twice a month, something like that. But then in my interactions, I would only show them like enough of a surface traits that would make it a pleasant interaction and seemingly like we're connecting, right? But then kind of withdraw and never allow for us to hang out enough where something deeper might come out, because I was afraid of what is that, what's going to happen? Are they going to see like what I'm really like and then have a bad reaction to that? Right. So eventually I thought that became kind of like a ridiculous thought to me. And I was kind of along the lines of what you're saying, seeing myself as like somebody who was just this potentiality. Right. And I could take on, I could connect with others. Or if I do think that there's something at my core that's maybe unpleasant to somebody, why does that have to be true? Two, could that be changed if there was something bad? And then I started having all these thoughts that kind of made me think, okay, no, I can go along a different path, right? Even in terms of like, let's say, achieving more in life or something like that. And this kind of relates to one of the exercises in the book, which is, imagine your life was written by a lazy god, right? Like you had a lazy storyteller, right? And now knowing that, maybe you want to do something a little deviant from your story, right? To make that story more appealing to the lazy god, to make it more inspired to be interested in your story. And I thought that was so weird, but at the same time, it's kind of, I don't know, like you could even tell just a natural smile comes on my face. Like I found it very enjoyable as far as that goes. And it's, I don't know, I like this kind of stuff as far as that goes. Like knowing that you're not somebody who has to be married to a particular character. You don't have to, we're taught to have like this is something like I've listened to in a lecture with like Alan Watts before, where we're all taught to conform as children, and we're taught that you're supposed to have like one personality. When you're a child, you have like one personality with your siblings, one with your friends, one with your teachers, and all of that. But then at some point, you're taught to conform and just have this one sort of steady, consistent one. And it kind of, it's such a rigid, confining structure that if you find yourself, stuck in that, I don't know, it could have all kinds of consequences that aren't necessarily good in the long term. So.
Yeah, I mean, I love Alan Watts. I spent my 30s doing nothing but listening to Alan Watts, and I think one of his claims is that this idea of that there's a kind of essential monad of selfhood is Judeo-Christian. That each of us is kind of given a soul by a supernatural being, and our goal is to sort of be true to that. Whereas in the more kind of the Buddhist or Zen Buddhist tradition, there's a sense that an ego is just an idea or a construct. It's not real. It's something we imagine. And of course, Watts is always encouraging his listeners to embrace that idea. I love that you said earlier that that exercise about imagine you've been made by a lazy God. How can you get him interested in you again? But that's just, I guess the as ifness of experience is what most interests me in this book. And I have another exercise where I say, okay, imagine your childhood bedroom. And if you could like put one object in that bedroom that wasn't there before, and then if you could rearrange that bedroom in the way you wanted, how would you do it? Which just opens up this kind of mind experience of like, well, if things have been shifted a little bit, would I be a different person? Which to me opens up to this idea that, I mean, if I ask you, who are you? You would say, well, I'm the kind of person, I'm the person that this happened to when I was 3 years old. And then this happened to me when I was 5 years old. And this happened to me when I was 7 years old. In other words, we start piecing together memories that kind of lead up to who we are now, that these experiences equal who I am now. But of course, you're choosing maybe what, 50 experiences out of 5 million. So it's like already we're selecting the memories that we think make us who we are. And the memories you focus on now, 10 years from now, you'll focus on other memories entirely. So the idea is that even our idea of I-ness, of subjectivity, is based on a highly selective narrative from our past. And if we start seeing the past not as something given and static, but the past as these kind of swirling narratives, and we can latch on to one and let the others go, that's empowering too. Because I think a lot of us think, oh no, I'm totally shaped by my past. And to an extent we are, obviously, but we can also create the past by choosing what we want to focus on in our memories.
Right. And it's really complicated. And it's so funny. Me and Alan were joking about the film Anger Management earlier. Have you ever seen it?
Oh, a long time ago.
Yeah.
That's Jack Nicholson, Adam Sandler. Yeah.
So there's this great scene there that, I mean, it's comedic, obviously, because it seems so silly on the surface. But Alan mentioned this, that he's like, oh, that movie's kind of like low-key poignant. So Adam Sandler's sitting there and he's trying to describe himself, and Jack Nicholson. So he says something like, oh, well, I'm like, the easygoing guy. I like the Jets or whatever it is. He's like, no. He's like, you're telling me about what you're feeling, telling me about who you are. He's like, okay, well, he's like, I have this job. He's like, no. Now you're telling me what you do for a living. Tell me who you are. And so, then he gets upset and he's like, I don't know what you want me to say. And he's like, oh, wow, look at him. He's angry. I think the point was to show that you are not these things specifically, right? So we are sort of this hodgepodge of traits. We are a hodgepodge of thoughts, beliefs, experiences, potentials, whatever they are, because that's so hard to assess most of the time, right? But the thing is to say that, hey, I am this person, it's always going to be incredibly limited. And I love that about your work. What you're saying is that, again, going back to the diagnosis, and because I'm a clinician, I'm going to focus on mental health more. So when you're thinking about something like bipolar disorder, automatically the thinking is, oh, so that means this personality or this person's personality goes from these high highs to these low lows. And that's kind of it, right? That's all there is to them. They're either like really wacky and kind of outlandish, or they're like really depressed. And I'm like, no, dude, have you met people with bipolar disorder? They're like regular people. They have interests and sort of hobbies, and they have, goals, and they love people and people love them. And again, it's like a lot of times with mental health, it's caricatured, where we have, again, this diagnostic manual and we expect only that from that person. And that's way too simplistic.
So speaking of the DSM, I mean, this kind of goes back to some earlier work I've done. I was just interesting to note, and I'm sure you know this, that the way certain mental health disorders were diagnosed, say 50 years ago, and the way they're diagnosed have changed radically. So, what 50 years ago might have been seen as like normal grieving for, say, the death of a relative, and like, oh, you're grieving, now would be seen as a kind of clinical disorder that would require medication. So it just kind of bears out your point that these diagnostic categories are far from given and stable. They're fluctuational too, because it's difficult to diagnose people and boil them down to one disorder. And then, you get a lot of overlap too. Well, bipolar, well, maybe you got a little OCD as well, or maybe a little this and a little that, just because, as you say, it's so complicated. Obviously, it's comforting to think reductively. And in the medical profession, you have to have these diagnostic concepts. I'm not saying we would do away with them, but I think it is important to note what you say, how nuanced and subtle and complicated every self is.
Right. I think it's just what's so interesting, right, is that if for example, a function of the ego or of just I, right, of just the self, right, is that you will inevitably, no matter what, identify or attach to some kind of a narrative, right, or to some kind of a thought or a belief, then it's very fascinating and empowering, as you say, that you can actually sort of more or less choose what you might want to identify with, and thus make yourself more of a dynamic sort of a personality. Now, the potentiality in that is very interesting, because then it's like, okay, so what can I do with that information, right? And then that's where it kind of brings us back to like some of these exercises, right? Like you could actually, I mean, so this is something I played around with. I wish I had something like this book actually years ago. I kind of did a lot of trial and error, but one thing that I did, and this might be sort of accidentally, is when I would go to the gym, and let's say I was running on a treadmill, or maybe switch to elliptical, whatever, I would listen to scenes from movies or from animes, like cartoon shows and all that, like certain like maybe deep scenes. And I wouldn't exactly listen to these scenes and take them one for one, like what is that scene about. I would kind of, as I'm running, try to imagine that, like almost like a music video in my mind, or like that something, or that I'm the character. And it's not literal. Like, for example, if somebody like is vanquishing like I don't know, like some kind of an evil entity or something like that, I would imagine that that's sort of happening, but that it might be like, oh, that's my ego that is now being slain. And then you get this like sort of feeling of a flow state or something like that. It could even be me and my ego teaming up. We're not enemies anymore, and like something like that. Or maybe there is no ego, and like I went through different phases of this, because apparently fighting your own ego is not a smart thing to do, apparently. But it's very interesting. And like these sorts of things, or these sorts of thought exercises, can really shift up your view of reality, and break you out of depression and stuff.
So early in the show, I said that one of my definitions of the weird is the defamiliarization of the familiar. Well, it's also the familiarization of the unfamiliar too. I mean, it goes both ways. So for instance, I think one role of art, of great painting, great poetry, great music, it is to defamiliarize the familiar. I remember when I was sitting as a freshman in college, learning about Emily Dickinson, and for some reason, the first stanza of her poem, there's a certain slant of light. There's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. Like when the professor read that, I was like, what the hell? Whoa, what the hell is that? And that whole poem, it just kind of threw me off, to where when I started looking at light beams coming through the window, they didn't feel the same way. It's like the world had become kind of re-enchanted. It's like, if you read like Walt Whitman's poem, Leaves of Grass, a long poem, but you don't think of grass the same way again. You see, Van Gogh's Starry Night, you walk out in the nighttime, it's a little different. In other words, these powerful works kind of invite us to reorient ourselves to the world by kind of knocking us off. That's defamiliar. defamiliarization of the familiar, I say. But the other move, I think, is what you were doing, like where you take like a film and you take a character who feels pretty mainstream, like, well, I'll go back to my therapist in a time of depression. He says, who are some of your favorite actors? And I said, well, obviously I love George Clooney. He's like, well, okay, if you're walking into your classroom tomorrow, how would George Clooney walk into the classroom? I mean, it's like, not that I want you to be George Clooney, but it's like you're taking this like very kind of this movie star, very familiar, but you're putting him in this context of, teaching freshman English. And it again, it's these little tiny shifts that refresh our relationship to the universe, because sometimes we feel very stale and stuck. So take something you know really well and make it strange. Take something really strange and kind of apply it to your life and see what happens. I mean, obviously these exercises are mostly experiments. Like, just try that. Just see what happens. Yeah.
And so when you say that that phrase, familiarize yourself with the unfamiliar, is that, if I understand correctly, kind of also like starting to become comfortable with mystery, so to speak, or so something along those lines?
I think that's a big part of it. I mean, the main part of it, and maybe, I don't know if you feel this way, but I mean, I'm 55 and I just feel like I kind of know what's going to happen in life. I don't. I mean, obviously new things can happen, and hopefully terrible things don't happen, but for the most part, we lock into a routine, and every day kind of feels like another day. So to just kind of alter that routine, not in a way that like disrupts my ability to be a good husband and parent or do a good job, it just kind of pushes me off a little bit to make the world more interesting. That's one thing I mean by the defamiliarization of the familiar. I'm sorry, that's hard to say. By the way, these ideas come from a kind of school of Russian literary criticism in the early 20th century, Russian formalism. That's kind of where I'm borrowing this from. But yes, I also think learning to feel comfortable with confusion, ambiguity, mystery, and not trying so hard to find an answer immediately. I'm sure Alan Watts would say this is one goal we should have in life. So the answer to your question is yes. That's another element to the book. Like, try to, life's weird anyway. We don't have to make it weird. It's just weird. And just be okay with that. Don't try to solve the riddles. One of my exercises is write riddles that have no solution, and on Post-it notes, and put them on the mirrors of bathrooms and bars, just so people have a moment like, what is that?
Yeah, I love that. And so just academically now speaking, because obviously you're a professor, I remember when I was, so first of all, there's kind of a discontent. I'm sure you see it a lot of times in kind of universities where people are pretty upset about just having to go to class, and it's monotony. And then it's also a lack of consideration. A lot of times teachers or adjuncts, they don't necessarily care. They have other things going on. So whatever, that stuff happens. But I remember what's so interesting is when I was in school, there was this kid who was like super weird, right? Really weird guy, brilliantly weird, I guess, at the same time. And so I remember we're sitting in class and he looks at me and he says, how crazy would it be if I just got up right now in the middle of the classroom, took a shit, and just walked out? And like, that's how angry he was. He's like, yo, can you believe like we're spending money on this? Yeah. So obviously, it's pretty crude, but I think the message was clear that a lot of people are kind of upset about the fact that they have to spend money on going to school. And it's like the same stuff, it's a professor regurgitating textbooks. They have to learn the same material that they probably won't really even use in the world. So Eric, can you talk a little bit about how you kind of spice things up in the classroom?
Oh, yeah.
There you go. Yeah. Those are really great stuff. Like, I remember thinking like, wow, I would have loved him as a professor.
Well, as I mentioned in the book throughout, two big influences on the book are like the Dada movement and the Surrealistic movement. These are like early 20th century art movements that value absurdity, the irrational. So I'm not as agile as I used to be, but I used to jump up on desks all the time. I mean, I'm a romanticist, so I teach people like Byron and Keats and Blake, and in the American side, I teach Emerson and Dickinson and people like that. And for me, teaching is performance. It really is. I mean, call me a narcissist, but I'm there. I'm trying to get laughs. I'm trying to get adulation. I just am. It's like this is what I'm about. So, I'll give you an example. I was trying to teach students what a poem is. What's the difference between reading a work that is a poem and not a poem? And I said, Emily Dickinson said, if you've read a real poem, you feel like you get the top of your head blown off. So I read a Dickinson poem, and then I went like this, and I went bam, and I gave myself a concussion. I hit myself so hard, I got all dizzy, and I was like threw up later in the day. I don't do that anymore. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I feel like students, especially in the humanities, especially in creative writing, they don't need to see knowledge as something out there that they can grab. They need to see knowledge as something alive here, and it's fun, and it's interesting. And I feel like I'm not saying I'm a great teacher. I'm just saying that's what I like doing. I mean,
Right.
I like leaping up on the desk. I like throwing erasers. I like climbing in the window. I mean, I don't do that stuff so much anymore. It's kind of a cheap effect, kind of a cheap trick. It's kind of like Dead Poet Society stuff, but whatever.
It's a great movie though.
But you know, I'm just very aware of not being boring, and I probably go too far. I probably pander too much to my students. But I don't want this weird student to take a shit in my classroom. Or maybe I do. Maybe that's exactly.
Maybe that's kind of the point. Yeah, you know what's so funny? That class was so awful that if you did do that, I promise you that would have made the entire experience
really.
way better.
Maybe that's what I should be going for. Maybe I'm selling myself short.
Yeah. So
but a lot of these exercises do come out of. I teach creative writing workshops, so a lot of these exercises I've tried out with students in workshops. And that was useful to kind of get a sense of what works and what doesn't.
Oh, and interesting. Yeah. What are some of the sort of points of feedback you've received about them, like from your students?
They love them. They love them. They just, well, part of it is because it's a game. It's fun. It's like, okay, let's take 20 minutes and how many, okay, you have a book in your hand. How many things can you turn this book into? Yep. And get in groups of 2 and write that up. Or, how do you feel right now? Come up with like 3 concrete images for how you feel right now. A lot of those exercises, and I think here's a big point we're not talking about. I think most of us are taught to go through life having that everything should have a purpose, especially when you're in school. Like, professor, what's the purpose of this assignment? And in some ways, the purpose of these exercises is that they don't have one. It's just a way to pass the time interestingly. I mean, so many students that will be reading a poem like, what does it mean? I'm like, look, did you go jogging this morning? Did you eat a good spaghetti meal last night? Did you get a little buzz last night with your friends? See the poem that way. It's just an experience. It's just like experience 5 minutes in this world of language. Yeah, later on, figure out what it means and write an essay. But for now, just experience it. And I think these exercises are in that spirit. Like, I got 10 minutes. Let me make that 10 minutes interesting and playful. Without having a purpose in mind.
By the way, what's so interesting about that? So Alan and I really differ on this, especially, well, in this respect, especially. So he and I, we went to with a bunch of our friends last night to the sauna. And so so I'm actually the kind of obsessive type, right? So I'm the one who's like, I can't relax. I need to have a purpose. We need to go somewhere. We need to be doing something. Yeah. We need to be doing something, right? And Alan's like, dude, like, why can't you just relax? Like, experience this. So he's all about that, right? He's all about taking things in, living in the now. That's kind of why.
I mean, I didn't push it on you that much.
That's what he was thinking. That's the mentalization part, right? Sure. So, but what's so interesting is that, like, I can't get out of that. So for me, I can't relax. It's incredibly hard. So whenever, I got to tell you, Eric, so even when I was looking through your book, my first question was like, what is the point of this? Like, what do I get out of this, right? So if I kind of think about it, I don't know, 3-4 months down the line, right? What is it going to get me? But the thinking for you is that the experience itself is really important. And so I want to hear from your perspective too. But first, let's start with Eric.
Oh, I have a question just to tag.
Sure.
Okay. So would you argue that somebody who does not like to relax needs it the most? Does that make sense? Like, oh, this makes me uncomfortable, therefore explore that discomfort, right? Like,
I would say that probably. And I got to say, I'm not a very laid back guy either. I mean, I'm pretty neurotic. And that's why I need exercises like this to kind of help myself slow down. I'm very project and oriented. Like, so I mean, I feel like I'm always saying I need to relax more. I need to relax more. And for me, relaxation is learning to do things that don't have a purpose. My favorite poet, Walt Whitman, he liked to use the word loafing. And he was fired from a number of jobs for being a loafer. And what's interesting about loafing for me is it's like, I mean, the most of the time we take a vacation so we can relax from our work life and get refueled for more of a work life. But there's a way in which loafing, you're not doing it for one reason or another. You're just like inhabiting time in a way where you're just open to whatever's going to happen next. And I feel like that changes our relationship to time. Most of us see time as, oh, I bet I know what's going to happen next. But if you can kind of divorce yourself from that and just like, I just want to exist and be light on my feet. You know, Hamlet says the readiness is all, like just see what's going to happen next. That's loafing in a way. And at the end, I think these exercises are trying to open spaces where we can just, let me put it another way, where we can just kind of embrace the world as isness and not something that ought to be something else. I mean, I'm constantly saying, oh, we ought to do that. We ought to do that. We ought to hurry up. We're going to be on time. You know, we ought to work out harder. We're going to lose weight. And that's fine. We have to do that. But there are these moments when you just go, no, I just am right now. I'm just going to exist right now without worrying about the outcome of that. That feels weird to most of us.
Right.
It feels kind of unmoored. And those are the kind of experiences I want to encourage.
Yeah, there's that feeling of I need to be doing something right now.
Yeah.
And the thing is, counterintuitively, loafing or just taking it easy, relaxing, even doing nothing, could have benefits too, right? Even so, let's say, you know, I have my phone here, right? Well, let's say I'm not doing anything. And then to fill up, you know, oh, I want to see something now just to be stimulated, right? Now that could have a value to it. There are amazing videos. You could potentially listen and watch a million different really beautiful things every single day and fill up your whole entire time with that. Don't get me wrong. But then there's another side to it where it's like, okay, well, what if you did do nothing and maybe you're not looking to something to kind of satisfy some kind of stimulus that you need. You kind of leave a space open. Maybe then that's where you might start actually thinking about maybe your connections in life. Maybe you just do nothing and you just completely relax, and it kind of brings you to this sort of not necessarily harmony, but you kind of reset a little bit, and now you have more resources to deal with those things now when the productivity comes. Like, it has so many uses that and then even if it doesn't have a use, right? Like, I'm thinking in terms of a use or a utility. Maybe that's completely wrong, and just being is its own reward, right?
And I would also add to that. So I think the message of the book is that for the individual, the reader, the person who's obviously looking into it, is that you deserve to just be for yourself. So a lot of times, and this is the thing that's hard for me to accept, is that when we're thinking about purpose, we're thinking always also about community, right? Like, what do I have to contribute, right? Or am I contributing enough today? And I think the book says, like, no, loafing is okay. You can literally just be for yourself and you're still likable, lovable, whatever it is, right? You don't have to always do.
Well, yeah. I mean, go ahead.
Sorry. Plus, even thinking that, for example, even being in the moment has a value. Even if you are thinking in terms of community, it could be potentially wrong to think that, oh, I need to be doing something to be of use, right? Maybe just being like even a presence, like listening to somebody, just an active listening. You don't have to even contribute anything, but essentially just being there as a space could be good for somebody else too.
Yeah. So I'm so glad we're talking about this topic. I'm just thinking, just right off the bat, three exercises are trying to encourage exactly what we're talking about, and there's science to back it up. So here I'm saying just exist, but here's why. So one is, make yourself bored. Studies show that when we get real good and bored, we often have our best ideas. We often gain insights, because when we're looking at our phone, we've got other things in our heads, and we don't get that kind of deep thinking. So one exercise is just stare at a wall for 10 minutes and see what happens. Another exercise is make yourself a niche, like a special place in your workspace or your house where you go like 30 minutes a day off and on and just doodle or look out the window, where you're just giving yourself a space to loaf. It's a designated loafing space. And another is, and this goes back to Alan Watts, take a walk, and your only goal is to look at like fences and gates and holes and imagine what's on the other side. What's on the other side? Don't look, but just play with what's on the other side. And you can say, on the one hand, all those exercises have no other purpose than to encourage an interesting, rich experience. but also possibly they might have a larger purpose of making you feel more creative for that moment, or helping you gain an insight into your life or the lives of others that you didn't have before. I guess the main purpose of this book, which is not about living a purposeful life, is how to feel more connected to the world. And that can be your community, it can be yourself, it can be your close friends. I mean, obviously we all want that, and probably all books are about that on some level, but I hope that I'm offering kind of a unique angle, a playful angle. And that's if the book's not playful and fun, a little funny, it's not doing its job. I mean, I rather draw little pictures in there. I mean, I just want it to feel like, oh, what the hell? There's something whimsical about the book. At the end of the day, I know I'm talking about it very seriously, but I hope it is like a kind of book you can just open up, put in your bathroom, put it on your coffee table, and just open it up randomly and just read a little bit of it. Like, that sounds good, and move on, or maybe do the exercise.
Yeah, I like the one where you make up your own curse word. Like that was fun. Yeah, no, like imagine like you make up a curse word that is not even one that exists.
Yeah,
like I don't know, it probably somebody has said this, but like, oh, fucktacular or whatever, just like you could say whatever, and then like I don't know, you see the reaction. I don't even have to even explain it, but it just puts a smile on your face, you know.
I hear you.
Yeah,
I love doing it. And also people think it's funny. Adam is like, that's amazing. That can't, by the way, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, right. Now I just remembered something. Yeah. Even in that particular chapter, it mentions how you reference not experiment, research that says that people who curse have a better sort of a pain tolerance or mental pain tolerance.
Wow.
Right. So technically,
they do.
Playing
people
around
who
with
curse while working out can push themselves harder than people who don't curse while working out.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going to ask you guys up front if this is a kind of podcast I can curse on, because I curse like
all the time,
a madman. I'm trying to keep it rated G. But
no, it's okay. No, we can curse. Yeah, we've cursed before.
Well, I'll try to get some in later.
Yeah. And just going back to the sense of purpose, and this is why I think that you actually are a great father, obviously not knowing personally what kind of father you are, but this is why I would say that you are. So I had a really tough upbringing. And then, so for me, the focus was always the family and other people. So with like kind of my old man, my stepdad, he would always say like, why are you wasting your time with this stuff? Right. So I used to, so talk about eccentricity, right? So I love professional wrestling, love it. Right. Oh my God. So it's like to me, it's like the greatest thing in the world. Right. So when I was a kid, my stepdad's like, first of all, I don't understand this. Right. So he's like, it's not real. And that's number one. Number two, it's all exaggerated. Like they're all on steroids, which is obviously true. He's like, nobody really looks like this. Right. And number three is like, what are they actually like doing for the world? Like, how are they helping people? They're not, right. Not really. But so for him, the idea was like, okay, if you're investing your time in something, it has to be purposeful in the sense of the bigger picture. Right. And for him, honestly, it was mostly money. It was like, how are you not being a burden? Right. How is professional wrestling going to help you not be a burden to the family? And so for me, I wish I had a father who would say like, yeah, I know this is super weird. I know this isn't even really that popular, but here's why you could do it for yourself. Again, going back to the idea of it being okay to just be for yourself. And so, and I love that I'm sure you do that with your daughter, where the idea is like, if she's super creative or if she's doing something that she just likes, again, that doesn't contribute in any significant way to like, society or like move civilization or whatever, just makes money. Right. But she can do that because she's allowed to just focus on those eccentricities and say to herself like, oh, wow, you know what? Yeah, maybe a lot of people don't like this. And yeah, maybe it does look super silly on the surface, but I like it.
I'm the older I get, the more I value the ridiculous. I mean, I think it's harmless. It's a way to pass time when you're engaged and interested. I mean, I grew up. I grew up with Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes and Wahoo McDaniels. All those guys. When I was a kid, and I loved it too. And I don't know. I think Alan Watts has a phrase. Charming irrelevancy. He says that's ultimately what art is. It's a charming irrelevancy. It's not quite that, but I like that. The idea that there's certain things in life that they're just there to make life feel a little better, even if it's ridiculous or stupid. That might be the point. Right. And I just think we need to make space for that in our lives. We need to watch professional wrestling for 30 minutes a day if we want to, or whatever it is. Because strangely enough, and again, we're talking paradoxically again, that will make you more productive, probably. Yeah. Because you won't be as uptight.
Yeah. Plus, I hate to say this because you guys are making points about the irrelevancy of it,
Mm.
but I could actually argue how it's relevant
Shoot.
too.
Yeah.
Go
Because
for it.
you're learning behavioral science, right? Oh, like this will, like if you act in this way, that's going to cause the whole crowd
That's
crowd
actually
to
true.
cheer.
Yeah, that's
or
true.
the concept of I forgot what it's called, baby face or heel.
Yeah. So
If somebody's like a hero or like a villain,
yeah.
and the reaction of the crowd too,
Yeah.
and how even a villain could be liked.
Mhm.
So that kind of explains some things kind of in your life in a weird way. You're like, wait, that guy's an asshole, but
Well,
that girl likes, oh, what's going on over there? Like little I'm just thinking
Yeah, no,
randomly,
this is
but
great.
yeah. It's
So
interesting.
I read a book some years ago called Everyone Loves a Good Train Wreck, Why We Can't Look Away, which is about morbid curiosity, and a whole chapter on violence in comic books, which most people would condemn, but it turns out it's extremely useful in kids learning about life, not only these kind of relationships you're talking about, but also what it means to be powerful. I mean, most kids experience violence in comic books not as like, oh, I want to go kill people, but oh, I feel powerful. Because a lot of kids who read those comics aren't necessarily, the alpha types. And it gives them a sense of power. So I wanted to say that, but then I wanted to like digress a little bit. I saw Bruce Springsteen in Charlotte, North Carolina in 1987, and Ricky Steamboat sat right in front of me.
What?
He had on this amazing leather jacket, and he looked so cool. And the whole concert, we were like, should we talk to him? Should we talk to him? And at the intermission, he just turned around and said, "What's up, guys?" And we shook his hand, and I was like, yeah, Ricky Steamboat and Bruce Springsteen in the same night. I'm done.
Damn.
Oh, you know what you would love? Oh my God. So we actually had Diamond Dallas Page and Jeff Jarrett on our podcast.
No way.
Yeah. So and Jeff is really great now because he's like back in wrestling. He's in AEW. He's about to like win some championship there. So I'm sure you remember Jeff from the Memphis days because like you know the territories obviously. Yeah, they're great people, man. And what's so right. And what's so interesting is that now it's finally come to a point where it's becoming acceptable. Whereas again, like 50 years again, and this is sort of the upbringing that I had. Older men were like, and that's kind of the thing with my stepdad. I think he was just embarrassed, like for him and for the family that I was into this shit. It's kind of like what's wrong with this kid? Like go play like football or something. Yeah. And by the way, every single time I asked him to go to a wrestling show, he would say, "Look, if you want, I'll take you to a basketball game. I'll take you to a football game. I'm not taking you to that shit because that's a waste of my money." And yeah, for a long time, man, it took me forever to get to a wrestling show. And now when we go, I'm like, wow, it's like, 10-year-old me would love this. But I'm assuming, in terms of the dad you would be like, yeah, if your daughter were into
totally came out of
right. Let's go.
Totally.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I mean, now I know that, I've done some martial arts and stuff, and like those guys are amazing athletes. Yeah. I mean, to do those jumps and flips and acrobatics, I'd break my shoulder immediately if I did any of those things. So when I was a kid, I was like, those guys aren't real athletes. Like, no, they're amazing athletes. Yeah.
Yep. All right. So, Alan, any final kind of questions for Eric before we start wrapping up?
Yes. If we wanted to follow your work, and of course, buy the book, where could we do that?
Well, you can buy the book at any major website where you buy books. You can also request it from your local bookstore. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I have a website, which is ericgwilson.net. That's ericgwilson.net. And you can find links to my Twitter and my Instagram and my Facebook from the website, ericgwilson.net. Yeah.
I love it. Eric, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Oh, this was fantastic.
This is
love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
All right. We'll talk to you soon, man.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Okay. First of all, time flew.
Yeah.
But hey, anyway, everyone, if you want to follow us, you can follow us at Seize the Moment Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter. We're at Seize_podcast. Like, subscribe, hit the bell on YouTube. And again, thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.